It's almost funny, in a heartbreaking kind of way, how skilled we've become at dodging our own emotions, not dealing with them, not naming them, not even glancing in their direction. We treat our feelings like they're something fragile that needs to be wrapped up and shoved deep into the back of the closet before anyone notices them. And we do it so naturally that half the time we don't even realize we're doing it. We've built entire identities around being strong, busy, focused, fine. All these tidy little labels that make it easier to pretend we're not carrying things that feel too heavy to face. But the truth is, emotional ducking isn't a flaw in our character. It's a survival strategy we learned early in life. Somewhere along the way, we started believing that acknowledging how we feel would make us appear weak or needy or dramatic. We thought feeling deeply would make life harder instead of more honest. So we taught ourselves to sidestep emotion the way people sidestep puddles. Quick, automatic. With the hope that we'll get through the day without getting soaked. We think we're protecting ourselves when really we're just running in circles around the parts of us that need the most attention. And we get good at it. Really good. We distract ourselves with work, with our phones, with endless obligations. We fill every moment with noise so we don't have to listen to what's going on inside. We stay busy because slowing down means feeling, and feeling means facing, and facing means dealing. And there's a part of us that wants nothing to do with dealing. We'd rather keep moving, keep joking, keep performing, keep telling ourselves that we're okay. But emotional ducking doesn't make the feelings go away. It just teaches them to grow quieter and heavier until they settle into our bones. They show up as tension in our shoulders, as tiredness that doesn't go away, as irritability we can't explain, as distance in relationships that once felt safe. The emotions we avoid don't disappear. They transform. And they transform into things we struggle to name because we never learned how to sit with the original feeling in the first place. And yet, we defend our emotional ducking like it's a badge of honor. We tell ourselves we're being strong. We tell ourselves we're being logical. We tell ourselves we don't have time to fall apart or unravel. But emotional honesty doesn't require falling apart. It requires courage. It requires presence. It requires the willingness to stop running long enough to ask, what am I actually feeling right now? And most people can't do that, not because they're incapable, but because they've been conditioned to believe they shouldn't. Sometimes we avoid our emotions because we fear what will happen if we finally acknowledge them. What if the sadness is deeper than we thought? What if the anger is bigger? What if the disappointment is sharper? What if the grief is still sitting in the corner, waiting for eye contact? We imagine that one moment of honesty will open a floodgate we can't control. But the truth is, emotions don't drown us. Our resistance to them does. The more we push them away, the more pressure they build. The more pressure they build, the more unpredictable they become. And then we find ourselves snapping at people we love for reasons that don't make sense. We withdraw from conversations because we don't have the energy to pretend. We feel overwhelmed by things that used to feel easy. We think we're failing when really we're just exhausted from holding everything in. Emotional ducking becomes a lifestyle, a quiet, invisible labor that takes up space in every corner of our lives. And at some point, we forget what it feels like to be fully present with ourselves. We forget what it feels like to be connected, grounded, open. We forget that feeling isn't the enemy, numbing is. And when we finally do slow down long enough to notice what we've been avoiding, it can feel uncomfortable, even shocking. But that discomfort isn't a sign that something is wrong with us. It's a sign that something inside us is waking back up. It's the beginning of reconnection, the beginning of awareness, the beginning of healing. Because emotions aren't obstacles. They're information. They tell us where we've been hurt, where we need boundaries, where we're longing for something more. They point us toward the parts of our lives that need attention. But we can't receive that information if we keep ducking every feeling that tries to reach us. And maybe that's the real tragedy of emotional avoidance. It disconnects us from ourselves. It disconnects us from the world. It disconnects us from the people we love. You can't be present in your relationships when you're not present with yourself. You can't experience joy when you're numb. You can't feel loved when you've built walls to keep everything out, including the good things. We think ignoring our emotions protects us, but it isolates us instead. And the price of isolation is steep. It shows up in the questions we don't ask, the conversations we avoid, the dreams we postpone, the intimacy we crave but can't seem to experience. Most people don't suffer because they feel too much. They suffer because they've denied themselves the space to feel at all. But the moment we stop ducking, something shifts. We begin to see ourselves with more compassion. We begin to understand the patterns we've been stuck in. We begin to feel the things we've been running from, and instead of breaking us, those feelings soften us. They make us more empathetic, more intuitive, more real. They reconnect us to our own humanity. And once you experience even a moment of that honesty, a moment where you let yourself feel something you've been avoiding, you start to realize that the world didn't end. The floodgate didn't drown you. You survived. You breathed. You softened. You grew. And that's the irony of emotional ducking. We do it to avoid pain, but what we're really avoiding is healing. And healing is the doorway to the life. We keep imagining for ourselves. Because the second you stop dodging your emotions, you stop hiding from yourself, and that's where everything changes. There's something almost poetic about the way we dodge our own emotions. We move around them like we're sidestepping puddles on a rainy street, pretending that if we're careful enough, quiet enough, disciplined enough, we'll somehow make it through life without getting wet. And for a while, we convince ourselves the strategy is working. We tell ourselves that staying busy is a good thing, that keeping it all together is admirable, that swallowing our feelings is a sign of strength. But emotional ducking doesn't erase anything, it just postpones it. And the postponement comes with its own cost, one we don't always recognize until we're too tired to keep dancing around the truth. We don't duck emotions because we're weak. We duck them because somewhere along the line we learn that feeling deeply is risky. Maybe we watch people fall apart and promised ourselves we'd never be that vulnerable. Maybe we grew up in environments where having feelings was treated like an inconvenience. Maybe we were celebrated for our ability to stay composed, calm, unshakable. So we made it our identity. But identities built on emotional avoidance aren't stable. They're heavy, fragile, and exhausting. They demand constant performance. They demand constant suppression. And suppression, not expression, is what slowly wears us down. People assume emotional avoidance looks like silence or denial, but it's usually much more disguised. It looks like overworking. It looks like caretaking everyone but yourself. It looks like pretending you're too busy to rest, too strong to cry, too capable to break. It looks like humor that deflects instead of connects, or like being the reliable one, because reliability feels safer than vulnerability. Emotional ducking becomes a lifestyle, a practice choreography, something we perform so well that even we forget it's a performance. But underneath all the rhythm, something inside us is still aching to be acknowledged. The cost of ducking emotions doesn't always explode at once. Sometimes it leaks. It shows up in irritability, in loneliness, in exhaustion that sleep can't fix. It shows up in relationships where we feel unseen, not because people can't see us, but because we don't show them the parts that matter. It shows up in those quiet moments when everything goes still and the feelings we avoided start tapping on the walls we built. They whisper, then they nudge, then they pound. Because emotions aren't meant to be managed like paperwork. They're meant to be felt, understood, and released. And yet, feeling them is what scares us most. Emotional honesty requires slowing down, and slowing down exposes everything we've been running from. It asks us to actually name what hurts, what scares us, what disappoints us, what we long for. It asks us to let go of the stories that protect us and replace them with truths that stretch us. It asks us to sit with discomfort long enough to learn from it instead of escaping it. And for people who've spent years ducking their feelings, this kind of honesty can feel like stepping into bright light after a long time in the dark. Blinding, overwhelming, but undeniably freeing. We think avoiding emotions will keep life simple, but it actually makes life more complicated. When we refuse to feel something, that feeling doesn't disappear, it shape shifts. It becomes overreaction, or detachment, or numbness. It becomes anxiety that seems to come from nowhere. Becomes anger at small things or sadness that feels disproportionate. It becomes the sense that you're living life through a filter instead of wholeheartedly. Emotional ducking asks you to carry what you're not willing to face. And the weight of unexpressed feelings is far heavier than the weight of truth. And still, we duck. We duck because emotional courage feels like stepping onto a tightrope, high exposed and uncertain. But here's the reality. You're not stepping onto a tightrope. You're stepping onto solid ground. It just feels unfamiliar because you've spent so much time avoiding it. Emotional honesty isn't a threat, it's a return. A return to clarity, to self-respect, to connection, to alignment. It reconnects you with your own humanity, the parts you've tucked away to survive the world instead of fully experience it. It takes practice. It takes learning how to acknowledge feelings without judging them, how to speak honestly, without apologizing, how to listen to your own heart without dismissing it as dramatic or unnecessary. It takes learning how to pause when you want to hide, how to breathe when you feel exposed, how to stay when you feel the urge to bolt. Every moment of honesty builds something inside you, something steadier, stronger, more grounded than any version of yourself built on denial. And this isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming someone true. It's about allowing your inside world to matter as much as your outside world looks. It's about letting your emotional life be part of your real life instead of a hidden file you pretend doesn't exist. When you stop ducking your emotions, you stop living half present. You stop settling for shallow connections. You stop abandoning yourself for the comfort of illusion. You begin to feel again, not just the hard things, but the beautiful things. Joy becomes fuller. Gratitude becomes easier. Love becomes deeper. Presence becomes natural. Because when you make space for your emotions, you make space for your whole humanity. And that, more than anything, is what strengthens you. Not pretending, not dodging, not hiding, but meeting your inner world with honesty and compassion. When you finally choose to stop ducking your emotions, you learn that the feelings you feared were not there to drown you, but to guide you back to yourself. Awareness becomes a completely different experience when you shift from dodging your emotions to actually sitting with them. And it's funny because most of us think we are self-aware, at least on the surface. We know when we're tired, when we're stressed, when we're annoyed. But emotional awareness goes deeper than naming a feeling. It's about understanding why it's showing up, what it's trying to tell you, and how it's shaping the way you move through the world. And choosing that kind of awareness in a world where everyone is rushing, numbing, scrolling, avoiding, and pretending. That's not just personal growth. That's quiet rebellion. There's a huge difference between noticing something and truly acknowledging it. When you notice an emotion, you understand it's present. But when you acknowledge it, you invite it in. You let it sit next to you without trying to wrestle it down or hide it behind a distraction. And that's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's vulnerable. Because it forces you to confront truths about yourself. Truths you've probably spent years running from. Awareness makes you look at where you've been hiding, and sometimes facing your own hiding places is harder than facing any external challenge. But once you start developing that sense of inner awareness, you realize how much of your life was built on reaction instead of intention. You see how much of what you believed about yourself wasn't really your belief at all. It was conditioning. Old wounds. Childhood stories. Unspoken expectations. People-pleasing patterns. Emotional survival strategies you learned before you even knew you were learning anything. And for the first time, you start hearing your own voice underneath all of that noise. That voice, the one you drowned out for years with emotional ducking, suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. It whispers the things you've been avoiding. This isn't working. I'm not okay with this. I'm tired of pretending. I want something different. That's the moment awareness takes hold. Not when you intellectually understand something, but when your inner voice becomes louder than your habits. And here's the thing about emotional avoidance. It disconnects you from yourself. It silences your instincts. It fogs your clarity. It makes you doubt your own reactions. When you repeatedly shove your emotions away, you're not just avoiding feelings. You're abandoning pieces of yourself over and over again. Awareness is the process of gathering those pieces back. It's reconnecting with the moments you dismissed, the pain you minimized, the desires you buried because they felt inconvenient, unrealistic, or too risky to acknowledge. And once you reconnect, you start seeing your life with sharper clarity. You notice the gap between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. You feel the difference between what drains you and what energizes you. You see how often you say yes when your whole body is screaming no. You become aware of the ways you shrink yourself to keep the peace, and the ways you inflate yourself to feel important. Awareness shows you not just your patterns, but the reasons behind them. It's not about shame. It's about truth. And truth is liberating even when it shakes you. Awareness gives you permission to slow down, really slow down, and start asking the questions you've been trying to outrun. Questions like, what am I actually feeling? What am I afraid will happen if I tell the truth? Why do I keep choosing comfort over authenticity? Why do I trust my fear more than I trust my potential? These questions don't always lead to immediate answers, but asking them is an act of courage. It's the first step in breaking emotional habits that kept you small. And when you allow yourself to answer honestly, even quietly, in the privacy of your own heart, clarity begins to unfold. You start recognizing that some things you tolerated weren't kindness. They were fear. Some things you avoided weren't protection. They were self-abandonment. Some things you defended weren't boundaries. They were excuses. Awareness asks you to gently dismantle the stories you built around your pain. And in their place, you begin building something more honest, more aligned, more grounded. But awareness doesn't work unless you allow yourself to feel. Not analyze, not rationalize. Feel. That's where most people get stuck. They want the clarity without the discomfort. They want the transformation without the vulnerability. They want the breakthrough without breaking down. But emotional awareness requires presence. It requires sitting with your truth long enough to understand it. It requires listening to your body, your reactions, your intuition, your heart, because the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. And awareness connects the two so they can finally speak the same language. And then something shifts, something deep. Awareness stops feeling like work and starts feeling like relief. You stop bracing against yourself. You stop fighting your own feelings. You stop running from shadows that grow larger every time you turn away. You stop believing that protecting yourself means hiding yourself. Awareness doesn't remove the hard things. It just stops making you feel alone with them. You begin to trust that you can handle the truth, that your emotions aren't too much, that your inner world isn't a threat. It's a compass. And when you trust that compass, your entire life recalibrates. You make decisions differently. You move differently. You speak differently. You begin choosing people who feel safe for the real you, not the edited version you used to offer. You set boundaries without apology. You stop over explaining yourself. You start recognizing that your needs are not burdens. They're signals guiding you toward a life that fits. Awareness becomes more than an act. It becomes a way of living, a way of belonging to yourself. It becomes the moment you realize that emotional ducking might have protected you once, but it's awareness that will carry you forward. Because the moment you choose awareness over avoidance is the moment your future finally has room to begin.